Right, so sorry, where is the slideshow? Actual. Yeah, okay. On the start. Yeah, excellent.
Are you coming in?
Okay. Thank you.
Do you know that there are more papers than initially? Do you know that there are more papers than initially? There are four in the program. There is a fifth one which is
Well, I don't know where that is, and is that person here?
if Alcina Testa. Are you here? So Alcina will also have a paper. We have changed her paper.
Okay, that's fine, but we're actually we're missing Felipe. He's not here.
He's not here. Okay.
So we might stick to so we can stick to the original timescales.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And what's her name?
Alcina Testa Bruce, it's your name? Is it your name? Okay.
Sorry.
Right. Thank you, Kathy, and hi everyone, and thanks for coming in on this very lovely day. So very fittingly, after Paula's keynote, I'm also going to be talking about citizenship. So I'm sure you'll spot some kind of connections, and maybe we can talk about them. So also, I'm very pleased to see that social representations colleagues are engaged with the concept of citizenship. I started my kind of social psychological. Give you all a second. I mean, I'm talking about myself anyway, it's okay. So I did start my social psychological trajectory using and learning about this theory, and ended up kind of employing the citizenship concept. So I think it's very nice that you're all here and that I'm able to present. So citizenship in the making, social representations in the study of everyday politics, that's the title of this talk. It is co-authored very importantly with two of my most esteemed and very close friends, colleagues in Greece, Irini Kadianaki and Lia Figgou. I say Greece, one of them is in Cyprus, but you get it. And together, this is actually coming up as a paper in political psychology, subject to final revisions, I should say. And we also have an edited volume on the social psychology of citizenship coming up with Routledge. So hopefully before the end of this year. So what I want to do, and on the back of Paula's talk as well, is to introduce or perhaps reintroduce a relational and process-based approach to citizenship, which seeks to encompass both its mundane, habitual, as well as its more transgressive potentialities. So I'm looking as citizenship as a present actuality and as a future potentiality, and I'll be drawing on the work of some people who are already in this room, like I see Martin Bauer, Eduardo at the back, and obviously I've already mentioned Paula's very relevant work. So towards the end, I'm going to be talking kind of citizenship as an everyday practice, and talk about how it actually comes to be realized in the very practice of it being enacted.
Sorry, Eleni.
It's okay.
There's
Just.
a gentleman here who can't hear, and I'm not quite sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Would you like to get a chair and come and sit here?
I can understand.
Elle vous
Sorry,
demande ce que vous voulez. Elle vous demande ce que vous voulez.
je viens voir parce qu'il y avait un problème.
Non, il a été traité le problème.
Il a été traité. Il y a eu un deuxième problème ailleurs.
Non, tout va bien ici. Tout va bien
Pas,
ici.
voilà, d'accord.
Tout va bien ici. Merci.
Sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. So importantly, I'm going to be drawing on social representations, social psychological theory, but also interdisciplinary, which I think is really important, particularly when we are using concepts from that have been traditionally employed and developed in other disciplines. Now, let me start with a kind of general introduction about why citizenship and why do we need to study it as social and political. That's how I usually define myself as a psychologist. We live in a time of what is called polycrisis. We have different kinds of economic crisis. We recently had and still having a kind of health crisis coming from the kind of COVID epidemic. We have a crisis of traditional politics, so no one really trusts politicians anymore, less so than they did. Very, very importantly, this usually becomes kind of encapsulated into this idea that we live in a populism era. That can mean very different things. I don't want to go into that. But just to say that this has been described as this kind of paradigmatic shift that is similar to the one that took place between the socialist and the neoliberal eras. That's not to say that we're past neoliberalism. I wouldn't claim that. But what it means is that the people is at the center of political attention. And that means that who is the citizen and what it means to be a citizen and what it means to do citizenship becomes kind of, as Ivana Markova might say, kind of a thematized or problematized idea. Very interestingly, we also have what has been described as diagonal politics. Really, that refers to the change of shape in contemporary politics. So we have regressive right-wing kind of cultural ideals, for example, around culture wars, around kind of minority, cultural minority, religious minority, and so on rights, kind of combined together within the same political movement with left-wing economic policies. You see that in, even in some of Marine Le Pen's policies, perhaps Giorgia Meloni is a good example, but definitely in the UK, you see that in the discourse of Nigel Farage, who's one of our extreme right-wingers at the moment, who's very influential back in the UK. Finally, we live in a time where that has been described as hyper-political, and I find that a very useful concept, because it means that politics are everywhere, and probably we all know, and we've all kind of thought about that as social scientists, that politics is everywhere and power is everywhere. But what hyper-politics turns our attention to is the idea that citizens actually also think that everything is political. So we have discussions around micro-aggressions, micro-sexism, about, we have different forms of political action from the ground up, even mundane stuff like clicktivism or those kinds of engagements with politics that are on the rise. At the same time, we have a burst of kind of social movement activity as well. But also, so the political kind of spreads onto the everyday, but the everyday also spills over, spreads onto the political. I could say the Twitterization or the quotidianization of the political. I mean, we see political announcements being made on Twitter or X or whatever it is. We see, we see kind of tech bros or tech oligarchs or whatever, those people like Elon Musk being front and center in political, informal, or what Paula would describe as institutional political action. So we see the everyday cultural kind of seeping into what is normally seen as really confined within the scope of formal institutional politics. So I approach these questions through the citizenship construct. So very broadly, citizenship can be described, and I take my lead from Emgi Naisin, who's a citizenship studies scholar. Very broadly, citizenship has been described or has been defined, however non-consensually, but this is a very broad definition, as an apparatus of government. It's an apparatus of government that governs the relationships between the citizens with each other, with the state and its various authorities, and with each other, and with non-citizens, I should add. Now, this relationship can be understood at different levels and different sides. So Engin Eisen has developed this interesting typology, citizenship in law, obviously the legislation around who is a citizen and what their entitlements are. In theory, that's related to all the kind of political theory and politics and IR kind of theory that kind of tries to define and distinguish between different citizenship regimes, like ethnic and civil, cosmopolitan citizenship. So there we have a kind of what citizenship should be as well, a kind of more normative ideals coming in scholarly discourse. And what is of most interest to us as social psychologists, I would think, is citizenship in practice. So how is citizenship practiced? So how do citizens enact their positions as rights bearers, and how are they denied those positions as rights bearers? So citizen as an actor vis-a-vis others, always embedded within with a context, ideological, political, and also relational. And then the last of Engin Eisen's kind of approach to citizenship is as an act, which is really about transgressive acts that disrupt existing kind of institutionalized citizenship regimes. So, for example, things like giving rights to women, kind of change the script altogether. I would argue that I don't want to draw a clear-cut distinction between any of those. I think they're useful analytically, but I see them not as different approaches to citizenship, despite the title of this slide. I see them as different sides, perhaps of knowledge production, of citizenship production. So different sides where citizenship is produced. And I'm interested in the practical bit. Right, citizenship as practice. Right, so you will have guessed that I don't see citizenship rights and duties as a status that citizens hold. They are enacted, so rights and duties only make sense if they are enacted, right? But their realization may be limited in actual practice. So, you know, young people may have the right to use public space, as Deborah Gray's and Rachel Manning's study has shown, but the enactment of that right is limited because they are seen as troublemakers, or in the UK, in using ASBOS, this kind of very weird kind of measure that they put in place, particularly for young people, they may be asked to leave because they create problems. So rights and duties are enacted relations, okay? It follows that citizenship is inescapably relational and inherently representational. It only becomes meaningful through processes of representation or recognition, I should say, within a system of social relations. So rights mean nothing unless they are recognized by others. And that recognition can take different forms. I may have a UK passport, which I do, by the way, and I am recognized when I go to vote because they ask for my passport. I have a right to vote, they let me vote. But when I enter the UK and they hear my accent and they see my tan, they ask a couple more questions. So in practice, it doesn't match. And so the practice is what I'm interested in. I've said a million times already. There you go. Citizenship can be said to be concretized in common sense, particularly in the ways that this common sense is acted through citizens' interactions with others in different contexts. There you go, a very generic definition for you guys. Right, there is quite a developing field in social psychology. Some of you, I'm assuming you would be familiar with some of that just because you're here. I'm assuming that. Quite a lot has to do with national citizenship and immigration. Minority rights, I say sexual minority rights, I don't know why I've said that, but the LGBTQ plus rights, welfare, public space, I've already mentioned Deborah and Rachel's work, education. So some of my work looks at citizenship education, the European Union and the environment. Paula's work, for example, and Susanna Batel's work on kind of environmental projects in Portugal. Overall, they have adopted a multi-perspective approach, so they've studied both so-called minorities and so-called majorities. They are, at least the ones that I'm looking at, published in journals of like BJSP, British Journal of Social Psychology and Political Psychology. They tend to be qualitative. There is some quantitative work, and also some ethnographic work. I should say that they are very Europe-centric, which is a problem, and they are focusing a lot on the global north, which is, where we are, I suppose. And a very discursive, or a critical discursive approach generally, not so much social representations. So I'm glad that we have this opportunity now. Citizenship in the making. So in the making, the title of this talk is really trying to stress this idea of citizenship as a processual practice, as a processual phenomenon. I'm not quite sure how to put it. Two key contributions, and I've said it's very important to locate ourselves within a bigger field of citizenship studies if we are to make any point and any difference. So what are our contributions? So the idea that the cultural is political and that everyday common sense or social representations in the context of this conference is a site of politics. Paula very rightly talked earlier about this battle of ideas that Moscovici has kind of initially thought about. And there's a focus on processes of sense-making and social relations. Now, what I want to do is, and I'm kind of, this is work in progress, so feedback and thoughts. I want to kind of take this a step further and think about how this processual approach can allow us to consider citizenship as an actuality. So what happens in my everyday, what happens when I go to the airport, when I'm stopped or I'm not stopped and so on, but also as a future potentiality. And this is where I'm going to be introducing the idea of the project that Martin Bauer and George Gaskell kind of introduced many years ago, and quite a few other people have taken it up since then. And I find it a very useful idea because it creates a focus for a kind of projecting perspective to the future. So the term project enables us to articulate citizenship as a practice that plays out in the here and now of everyday experience and as a nascent or emergent potential of alternative citizenship constructions within a reimagined common sense. So that's a bit wordy there, but I hope you get the idea. And I'm also using this term that I found in Gina Philogene's writings and also in Susanna Batel and Wallace's paper, which I found really interesting, is this idea of the anticipatory representation. So citizenship projects are anticipatory or emergent, and I'll tell you why I use this term instead, constructions of citizenship under conditions of political uncertainty, and that is key. So to describe citizenship projects as emergent, and that's a key term, is to stress their liminal, and drawing on the work of Paul Stenner and actually Eduardo Zulato, who's sitting back there, to stress their liminal in-betweenness. On the one hand, they are grounded on the present in the established common sense, however that common sense is fractured and multiple, and on the other hand, they seek to break from this common sense and institute new ways of doing citizenship. So the emergence is exactly that in-betweenness. So this idea links present and future, actualities and potentialities. Projects are imagined potentials which guide political action in the present vis-a-vis others. Am I talking too fast or too slow?
No, you're absolutely fine.
Perfect sense.
You have about another sort of 9 minutes or so.
Okay, so thank you. So here I'm drawing on a paper that I co-authored. Oh, well, I'm going to be drawing on that paper on the next slide, actually. So, as I said, the idea of the project makes more sense in order for us to articulate political change in moments of disruption, okay? So I have several references here, but the idea is that in moments of uncertainty and disruption, or crisis, although I know that's a contentious term, you know, whose crisis, in whose terms, and so on. The idea is that established certainties lose their certainty, but new common sense coordinates are yet to be realized. So we're talking about an epistemic crisis. So who is the epistemic authority? Who knows? Who knows? Who can I turn to? Who can tell me? Is it my teacher? Is it my political leader? Is it, you know, the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or whichever party? So a bit like everything seems to be a little bit uncertain. We've discussed this in our paper with David Campos and Paul Stenner as a type of representational unraveling. So you have a representation and it kind of unfolds itself. It breaks into its constituent parts, and you try to put it back together in some way. Right, and that, and drawing a bit on kind of the thinking of Alex Gillespie, who's someone that you might know, is this idea that when we have cracks and kind of disruption, and also actually Gerard Dubin's and others, disruption in kind of on what we know, they open up a space for they open up a creative potential, including citizenship projects, which is I've described. My example here is Brexit. I've been using this example for several years now. Somehow it's still topical. It was on the news this week again. Apparently Francois Macron, whatever his first name is now in the UK and they're talking Brexit or post-Brexit or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, so the disruption of Brexit is quite an obvious example. At the very kind of legal and kind of institutionalized kind of level, Brits, I keep saying that Brexit, if anyone lost something because of Brexit, if anyone lost their rights, it was the British citizens, because they couldn't just travel abroad and they couldn't just so easily own property in Spain, which they love to do. Or, you know, they can actually, but it's not as easy in terms of their bureaucracy. And you had reports of British people just being surprised that they have to queue at the airport because they have to be checked and stuff, and they have to be stamped. So all of that, so suddenly all these people kind of realize that Brexit is not just, you know, to do with Brussels bureaucrats, but it's actually to do with how we live our lives and do our holidays. So that's just an example there. I'm going to be talking more about it. Right. More importantly, I think what happened is, I did talk about this kind of epistemic, how did I put it? Epistemic uncertainty or something. Yeah, epistemic crisis. So what happened is you had this kind of uncertainty about what the left is, and by the left I mean progressive left, not center left necessarily, versus right. So that distinction came apart. Here's an example of what we called Brexit unraveling and what we described as, I think Eduardo would call it de-anchoring, but at the time we call it lifting the anchor. So Brexit unraveling, lifting the left's anchor, and by the left here, obviously, I mean the political left. So I'll just read it out from one of our participants in focus groups. Actually, Kathy, you conducted those focus groups. Well done, you. Oh, it was really good data there. Yeah, it's good that you're here, actually. So I feel like everyone is focusing on the far right. UKIP, this is the extreme right kind of party. I feel like everyone is focusing on the far right. UKIP kind of exiters, but there's got to be a side that's coming from the left. People who are on the left who want to leave, like almost can't speak out. They've lost their voice because they are scared of looking like they're far right and xenophobic. it makes me, that's another participant, it makes me feel a little uneasy about the whole thing because you are essentially voting for the status quo. And it does feel like most big business and the banking sector want to stay in. So basically, if you were left-wing, and there was this kind of polarity between remain and leave, you had to choose a side. And traditionally, perhaps the more progressive, not the central left, but the more kind of lefty left in the UK has been somewhat Eurosceptic because the EU is kind of more seen as a neoliberal kind of project. But now you had no choice because to vote to remain would be the right thing to do if you're left, if you're an internationalist, but to vote to leave on the base, to vote to leave would make you xenophobic and kind of, hating immigrants and all of that. So that was the polarity that was constructed and put to the British electorate. Now, people from the left who were very critical of capitalist globalization, of neoliberalism, and of the European Union were left without an anchor. And there was all sorts of discussions and uncertainty coming from, at the time, what was the time at the top of the Labour Party in Britain that couldn't really make up its mind and so on. So they weren't sure what to do. So basically, to remain in the EU, to vote to remain becomes both, that's what I mean by in-betweenness and by this idea of liminality that Eduardo and I and Paul actually has been developing. To remain becomes both progressively cosmopolitan, internationalist, and regressively supportive of the neoliberal establishment. Whilst to leave, so to vote to leave the EU, becomes both regressively nationalistic and progressively global. So really, the nationalism-internationalism dilemma came unsettled. And we call that dilemma, where am I? An axis of emergence. This was the axis, nationalism versus internationalism or cosmopolitanism, it was more usually kind of framed as. We kind of articulated that as an axis of emergence, so as an axis around which a new structure of meanings begins to take shape. And that means, obviously, that this kind of liminal space has creative potential. I should say that there are several projects that are potentially developed in that space, okay? I'm gonna be talking just in the next slide before I finish about the so-called, what I've called the cosmopolitan Brexit. But there was also a project on Lexit, so a left exit. So leaving the EU, not because we like the EU, we hate the EU. Not because we hate immigrants, we love immigrants, but because we hate how the EU has treated Greeks, or something like that. So there was different competing projects, and I think that comes again from Martin Bowers and George Gaskell's kind of conceptualization of the idea of the representational project. And I think the kind of later kind of re-articulation into the wind road, something model. So there's an example of cosmopolitan Brexit as a citizenship project. I'm just going to talk about this first quotation. It comes from people who voted, from a focus group that intended to vote to leave. And they say, leaving the EU means that people who are from Europe aren't in front of the queue. It will be equal for everyone now. That's why it's less racist. So it may sound surprising definitely to those of you who have spent some time in the UK, to see Brexit as less racist. Because the general kind of understanding, consensus in the media before Brexit, not now, by the way, and in the political establishment was that Brexit was a disaster economically, but also in terms of Britain's kind of credentials as a tolerant nation, right? So it was a kind of a challenge to that. And this is kind of going back to Paula's talk about kind of the dialogicality of it, I think that the dialogue, the other in this utterance, that this very first one is, if you're voting Brexit, you must be racist. So they're kind of arguing against that, and by saying, no, we're actually less racist because we're opening ourselves to the entire world, we're not Eurocentric, based on this kind of idea of meritocracy, which is another problematic term. So, but I won't go into that right now. So, cosmopolitan Brexit, let me find where I've put it something. So yeah, it was advanced, this project of cosmopolitan Brexit was advanced particularly in the right wing of the spectrum, of the political spectrum. It was used to both narrate the reasons for the leave vote, for example, the Brussels bureaucrat and so on, and the lack of sovereignty, and also the so-called will of the people. The people vote and they have no effect because the bureaucrats make the decisions. So it was used to both narrate the reasons why we should leave, but also to imagine for the future a more global and free post-Brexit future. This project articulated Brexit as an internationalist project, which, if actualized, we're still, this is still going on, would unshackle the UK from the confines of Europe and the EU, and it would enable it to be truly independent and sovereign. Obviously, several authors have commented on the imperialist and nationalist undertones of this project, but it's so. This project re-articulated, reimagined, let's say, the rights and relative positions of different migrant groups in the UK, so EU migrants and other migrants, Commonwealth migrants, and so on, in relation to each other and to British citizens. So mobilizing a meritocracy principle, cosmopolitan Brexit challenged the differential entitlements of EU and non-EU migrants, whilst, less obviously, it maintained an assumed superiority of the British nation against all others. In this way, the Brexit project challenged the long-standing dualism between the deserving good and undeserving bad migrants, EU, non-EU, elite, non-elite, white, non-white, but in its place, it erected a blunter, two-tier scheme of British nationals versus the world, while it simultaneously highlighted the need for increased control of immigration and reduced immigration numbers, and along with the freedom to have it, and obviously that also came a kind of economic project as well alongside that. In short, these sense-making openings enabled by the Brexit rupture provided the ground for re-articulating or stretching, that's a nice word that David Kaposi came up with, stretching the political value of cosmopolitanism based on a supposedly colourblind vision of equality and a nostalgic view of national sovereignty, amongst other projects that were, unfortunately, I should say, they didn't gain as much momentum.
We'll wrap up, Eleni, pretty soon.
Yes, so that's my last slide. I don't need to talk to my last slide, but thank you. Thanks, I hope this made sense.
I'm sure we'll have time for questions at the end for everyone, but is there any particular questions that people would like to ask Eleni? Yes, Joe?
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the left lifting its anchor and not knowing where to put it. So I remember, being part of left organisations at the time of Brexit. Representationally, a lot of people on the left felt that to be pro-Brexit was automatically equal right wing, and there was quite a lot of controversy over it. Although people managed to kind of gloss over it during the years of the Corbyn project, but there was a lot of that. A lot of very confused people, trying to work out where the Brexit project sat. But the thing is, there's this new political grouping that's coming out with Zara Sultana and everything like that, and possibly Jeremy Corbyn. I wondered what you made of that in terms of the left lifting its anchor and trying to decide where to put it in an environment where, you know, many people in the Labour Party who have recently left the Labour Party are very disillusioned with Keir Starmer. I wonder what you saw that in terms of representationally as a search for meaning or whatever.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, part of the reason why I'm looking at the concept of emergence and kind of this idea, I've revisited the idea of the project, is because I want to see what those potentials come to. And really, on a more kind of personal political level, it's because I feel so disappointed with what I see. But I do think that there are kind of seeds or traces of creating things that are better. At the time, this is many years ago, those focus groups, and at the time, Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Labour Party. So that's exactly what we describe, is what we found in our data. So Labour, young people who would normally vote Labour, I mean, they were pro-Corbyn, I think, or they seem to be. They weren't sure, and I think that kind of points to the importance of leadership. So, you know, we talk about the everyday, and we talk about citizens and citizen-oriented perspectives, but we need to understand that that political actors are not individual citizens or a state or a local council, but leaders, and the movements that they create are also actors. So, you know, the Momentum movement, for example, in the case of Corbyn. So, so I'm thinking that falls into that category, and maybe then that would be an emergent project. It still hasn't taken much shape from what I've seen, but I like the looks of it. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't know if I've answered your question. Have I?
But do you think there'll
Sorry,
be...
can we just keep it, because we're really over time.
Okay, I mean,
Can we just leave this till the end if we've got
Yeah.
time? Would that be
Thank
okay,
you.
Eleni?
Yeah, I mean, yes, thank you. Sorry for taking too much time.
Okay, I'm Boumédine Bouriche from Aix-en-Provence, Aix-Marseille University. From the Social Psychology Laboratory of Aix-en-Provence. First of all, I have to say that I don't want to create wrong expectation with my English title, because I will communicate in French. Okay? Donc, je voulais me mettre debout parce que, en tant que Méditerranéen, on aime bien parler quand on est debout avec les mains. Mais je vois que mon régulateur, il m'a dit non. Donc, je vais rester là. Est-ce que si je reste là, ça va pour toi? Là. Ok. Je vais aller là-bas. The title of my communication, Social Representation as Cognitive Emotional Processes, an Integrative Approach Proposal. Donc je vais présenter un modèle, et la difficulté quand on a 20 minutes pour présenter un modèle, c'est que ça va être compliqué de rentrer dans les détails. Donc je vais vous donner les grandes lignes de ce modèle, et puis on pourra échanger en dehors de la session. Donc, s'intéresser aux relations entre émotion et représentation sociale, c'est s'intéresser d'abord, en ce qui me concerne, sur le rapport qui est un axe important dans la théorie de représentation sociale, le rapport des représentations sociales à l'immédiateté du contexte. Et il faut tout de suite rajouter que concernant l'immédiateté du contexte, elle est surtout marquée par la variabilité de la réalité. Cette variabilité, qui permet de constater ici, pour ceux qui ne reconnaissent pas, nous sommes sur les Champs-Élysées ou l'avenue de la Grande Armée, à deux moments différents d'une réalité, où à gauche, durant la période du Covid et du confinement, et à droite, durant les Jeux Olympiques de l'année dernière. Et on constate que, précisément, la variabilité de cette réalité. Eh bien, cette réalité très variable, elle nécessite un système de signalement. Et donc, pour moi, l'hypothèse, c'est que c'est les émotions qui vont permettre d'être des signaux de cette variabilité de la réalité. Et donc, l'hypothèse que je fais, c'est que les émotions, si on doit s'interroger sur leur fonction, en tout cas, moi, dans la façon que j'ai de m'interroger à propos d'elles, c'est de dire qu'elles vont être au service de la sociogénèse des représentations, elles vont participer à la sociogénèse des représentations, c'est-à-dire que je vais les définir comme des dispositifs, des dispositions individuelles au service de la sociogénèse des représentations sociales. Et dans le modèle que je vais présenter, je vais surtout attirer l'attention sur le rôle de la tension qu'il faut comprendre dans ce qu'elle était dans l'esprit de Moscovici, c'était la tension comme un drive dans la sociogénèse des représentations sociales. Et donc, cette tension va être au cœur du processus, et de Grafekins en avait déjà parlé en 2012. Alors vous retrouverez ce que j'ai dit dans un article qui est paru sur les Papers on Social Representation en 2022, pour ceux qui souhaitent avoir les détails. Et donc j'ai titré, en second titre de ma communication, que cette communication va porter sur les tensions entre des pensées à propos du monde avec des pensées dans le monde. Alors évidemment, les pensées dans le monde, ça va faire référence aux émotions, et donc émotions en termes de révélateurs des expériences individuelles de la réalité. Et les pensées à propos du monde, les représentations sociales. La première phase intègre un élément important, et ça rejoint ce qu'a dit Eleni tout à l'heure, toutes les caractéristiques en rapport aux contraintes de la réalité comme l'inattendu, la nouveauté, la non-familiarité, l'étrangeté, qui va constituer une contrainte de la réalité à travers un événement. Donc dans la communication d'Eleni tout à l'heure, c'était le Brexit. En quoi le Brexit, en tant qu'événement disruptif, va entraîner la dynamique des représentations sociales? Donc moi, je prendrais le cas du Covid. Mais on peut prendre aussi, si Paula était encore là, Paula ce matin a parlé du tourisme au Portugal, en quoi le tourisme en tant qu'événement de la réalité va entraîner une forme de disruption dans la façon de voir la citoyenneté des Portugais, des Anglais, ou ici pour le SARS-CoV des Français. Il faut dire que les émotions et les représentations sociales partagent deux caractéristiques communes. La première, c'est qu'on retrouve autant chez les émotions que dans les représentations sociales les caractéristiques de contraintes de la réalité qui vont s'imposer à elles. Et la deuxième caractéristique commune entre émotion et représentation, c'est qu'elles sont toutes les deux constitutives et constituées. D'accord ? Alors, la première phase, c'est la tension émotionnelle. Avec un événement disruptif comme le Covid, qui nous fait remarquer qu'elle va mettre en évidence ce que je considère dans un état émotionnel que je vais qualifier et définir comme état de dissonance dans la relation inter-objet. C'est-à-dire une faille ou une violation du système d'exploitation, d'attente, qui est une des fonctions des représentations sociales. Et donc on a vu l'impact qu'a eu le Covid à l'échelle mondiale comme un événement disruptif majeur. Je vous ai mis des références des collègues chercheurs qui ont travaillé sur évaluer le niveau d'impact de cet événement. Ce qui m'amène à parler de ce que j'ai qualifié de préphase, c'est quand on a un événement comme celui-là, et bien cet événement, il y a des chances, le Covid, Et là, je fais référence à l'article de Wagner, Valencia et Leja Barreta, quand ils ont parlé de conditions chaudes et conditions froides. Comment un événement disruptif comme le Covid va venir chauffer, mettre en activation des différents objets de représentation sociale. Donc ça peut être la santé, la maladie, la vaccination. On a vu que le Brexit, c'est venu activer l'objet qui est la citoyenneté, par exemple. Ben là, c'est pareil pour la vaccination. Et donc, la préphase, c'est important de distinguer la préphase dans le processus, ce qui m'amène à faire référence aux travaux de Denis Jodelet, qui disait quand on analyse les processus dans la représentation sociale, il ne faut pas oublier qu'il faut tenir compte du produit, c'est-à-dire du contenu, des éléments de la représentation. Et donc la préphase, elle est là justement pour identifier les contenus représentationnels. Donc c'est une étape préliminaire dans l'étude du processus cognitivo-émotionnel. Et donc, c'est là que je vais convoquer une première approche qui est l'approche structurale, hein, c'est celle majeure, d'une façon majeure, qui va nous permettre d'identifier les significations internes de la représentation, et notamment la théorie centrale sur où se situent les éléments périphériques et les éléments centraux. La phase 2 va directement concerner le rapport interobjet entre ego et l'objet vaccination qui a été activé par un événement disruptif, et je l'ai appelé psychologie, tension psychologique. Ici, il s'agit d'une pensée sur le monde. Donc on a vu comment la vaccination, l'objet qui a été activé, a entraîné des émotions de joie ou de colère par rapport à la découverte ou la disponibilité du vaccin. Je ne sais pas si vous vous rappelez, on a eu tout de suite une expression émotionnelle différente selon qu'on était content, joyeux, de savoir qu'on découvre un vaccin et qu'il va être disponible, ou bien pas du tout content, voire en colère, parce que justement, cette disponibilité du vaccin était trop rapide et ne respectait pas le principe de précaution. Et vous avez vu comment un événement peut donner lieu à deux émotions différentes selon le rapport qu'on a à l'objet. Ça va, for the time?
Yes, you have about another sort of 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes?
Yes.
Ok.
Maybe 5 minutes and then some questions.
Ok. Et donc la tension psychologique qui est née, elle va faire naître le besoin de se confronter et de traiter cette dissonance. La charge émotionnelle en termes d'intensité de polarité positive négative va donc conduire la relation ego-objet sous une tension positive ou négative qui va entraîner, qui va motiver le travail cognitif. Et je pense que c'est en ça que Moscovici voulait exprimer que les émotions pouvaient être un drive en termes de travail socio-représentationnel. Eh bien moi je fais l'hypothèse que précisément ce travail cognitif lié à la dissonance liée par l'émotion, c'est déjà un premier positionnement du sujet dans son adhésion au sujet, c'est-à-dire ce que doit, je pense, appeler un ancrage psychologique. La phase 3, et là on revient à la communication de Paula ce matin, voire d'Eleni tout à l'heure, c'est la phase dialogique. L'ancrage psychologique va conduire le sujet, l'individu, à être le porteur d'une pensée sur le monde révélée par l'émotion qu'il a ressentie. Et donc, il va s'agir d'une connaissance contextualisée grâce à l'émotion qu'il a ressentie et va faire de lui le porteur d'un enjeu épistémique. Donc, Eleni nous parlait tout à l'heure de epistemic crisis. Eh bien là, il s'agit un peu de ça dans le processus. Et donc, il y a un enjeu épistémique parce que l'individu devient porteur d'une connaissance qu'il a eue de la réalité. Et c'est cet enjeu épistémique qui va le motiver à aller vers les autres, dans le rapport à l'altérité. Et donc, le besoin de l'altérité va créer cette situation dialogique, notamment par la symétrie de connaissance qui a été rendue possible entre celui qui vit une émotion et quelqu'un de sa communauté ou quelqu'un de son groupe. Ben, il se trouve que le rapport à l'altérité est une des motivations principales du partage social des émotions dont l'auteur principal est Bernard Rimet. Et donc, je considère que les situations de partage social et émotionnel sont des situations dialogiques de représentation sociale. La phase 4 du processus, la tension psychosociale. On a vu le phénomène de partage social des émotions largement à l'œuvre durant la pandémie de Covid-21. Vous avez des références que je vous ai mis en haut qui ont travaillé sur ce phénomène. Hein. Et donc, les tensions émotionnelles qui sont relatives à la vaccination ont fait naître différents positionnements sociaux liés à différents contextes, que ce soit des contextes culturels liés à la santé, les personnels de santé, l'éducation, la culture, l'économie, le sport et la famille. Donc vous en avez des exemples ici. D'accord? Donc les pros et les anti-vax. Et donc, c'est comme ça qu'un objet comme la vaccination va devenir, tel que le définissent Jodelet ou Kalampaliekis et Apostolidis, un objet complexe d'orientation sociale qui va être porteur d'enjeux épistémiques et identitaires. Donc pour terminer, j'aimerais attirer l'attention sur le modèle que je vous ai présenté de manière très rapide, hein, mais je vous renvoie à mon article de 2022 si vous voulez avoir des éléments de détail. Je veux attirer l'attention sur la complémentarité des approches, parce que souvent on oppose des approches, et ici ce modèle, à mon sens, nous permet justement d'envisager les différentes approches des représentations sociales dans une perspective complémentaire. La première, c'est l'approche phénoménale, puisque quand on étudie les émotions, il est clair que la variété des expériences de la réalité en rapport avec les émotions vont créer des zones de tension, et c'est important d'avoir plutôt une approche phénoménologique. Ensuite, ces tensions et ces zones de tension ne peuvent pas être identifiées sans tenir compte du produit, en fait, des sens, des significations et des composantes de la représentation. Et pour ça, l'approche structurale est parfaitement pertinente. Eh bien, qu'elle implique aussi le rapport à l'autre hein, dans l'approche dialogique, et donc c'est pour ça qu'on convoque aussi l'approche dialogique dans ce modèle. Et que, précisément, ces zones de tension vont potentiellement générer des positions, des prises de position en relation avec l'objet. Et donc là, on voit tous les travaux de Nouvelles sur l'approche sociodynamique. Et pour finalement, voir qu'en fait, que ces processus sont générés à partir d'expériences de la réalité, ce que dans l'approche sociogénétique, on appelle le ground, le terrain, et qu'elles vont porter la marque des insertions sociales des individus. Des remarques conclusives, je voulais aussi attirer l'idée, je l'ai déjà dit tout à l'heure, que les processus sont avant et après le produit, et je cite Moscovici, c'est seulement en prenant compte des contenus que les processus peuvent être systématiquement analysés. Il faut considérer ce modèle dans le contexte de la triade psychosociale comme une unité complète de connaissances et de communication. On ne peut pas juste aborder un aspect, c'est dans le sens de l'unité complète. Et puis considérer que les représentations sont des objets dynamiques de changement. Sinon, on ne peut pas comprendre le rapport des relations entre émotion et représentation. Voilà, en guise de diapo j'aime bien terminer par ça, conclusive. Dans un monde qui est en perpétuel changement, en donnant aux émotions la place et dans la partage des émotions, la place qui mérite d'être celle qu'elles ont, une communauté capable de convoquer son passé, définir son présent et préparer son futur. Merci de votre attention.
Are there any questions to ask?
Yep. Thank you very much. As you know, I'm French too, but the presentation is in English. I feel that it's better to have a question in English. So, you named your model as cognitive emotional processes, and I feel that in the description you insist on the dynamic aspects. And even though you mentioned the product versus process, position put it by Abric, I read your paper. There's one thing that I don't understand, and I would like you to explain more. Is about how does this model account for the fact that there is emotions or emotional contents in social representations as a product when you study an object. When you study the social representation of work, for instance, you will see people mentioning fear or something like that. It seems to me that this is the consequences of these processes. But how does this model account for that?
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. As you mentioned in your paper of 2021, there's two ways to study the relation between emotion and social representation. This is the second way, okay? But you mentioned the first way, how social representation produce emotion. In this case, the model is just concerning the relation between emotion and social, is why I explain that I'm in the function of emotion on the social genesis of social representations. Okay?
Yeah, that's more.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Yes, Martin?
I'm kind of fascinated by the argument of a sequence of negotiations that would produce a representation.
Yeah.
But I lost track of what you represent. Is it vaccination or COVID? Because I can imagine, and I've always thought that is the power of social representation, to say there is an emotion-free representation of COVID, which is the virus as a scientific object that is clean from every particular interest, inclusive your body's needs and whatever. Okay? And then we have a world which is full of body needs, emotions, whatever, that also creates a virus. In other words, we have always a doubling of the reality. And we are living in a tradition that has come to assume that the scientific one has a priority, but social representative reverses the priority. So what are you actually representing? The process is good. Are you working on a COVID representation?
Can I answer in French, because
please.
I want to be sure to answer your question. Je voulais attirer l'attention sur le caractère disruptif d'un événement de la réalité. Or, le Covid is a disruptive event, but this disruptive event produces the activation of multiple objects of social representation as health or vaccination.
Certainly. The British COVID was different from the Japanese.
Of course. Okay. My answer is satisfying. Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just ask if Felipe is here? Yes, you're Felipe?
Felipe is our student.
Who is your student? Yes. Sorry, is he not coming? You're presenting it. If you'd like to come and present, thank you.
What's happening now?
The next one is definition of the inequalities of social representation among mathematics teachers. And also Alcina in itself, who's presenting. Thank you.
You need to connect this one, or you prefer the USB grab?
I prefer
Okay. So you have to plug
because
this.
it's probably
Okay.
because
You can try it, please. You can try. I say. Yeah, here.
I'd like to introduce Felipe, who isn't here, but he's a student of Alcina who will be presenting us on the definition of the object, equality for social representation.
I need to complete, okay?
Okay, no, don't worry.
You want some help or it's okay for you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Would anyone like some water while we're waiting? Yeah, does anyone want anyone?
So, hello guys, and first of all, sorry because I couldn't be here to see you guys in person. I really want.
My name is Alcina Maria. I'm from Brazil. And I work in Centro of Federal Educação Tecnológica of Rio de Janeiro. And today I will be giving two presentations, but now I presentation only one about Felipe Couto work, my student, the PhD. The second presentation is work by Davidson, Vitorassi, doctor, but after that. Both are part of the research group I coordinated. Title the group is Science Education and Social Representation, CIRS. Felipe made a little video to a presentation, and after that I complementary with his presentation with some slides, okay? And the afternoon for us. Important. The thematic of the doctor project by Felipe is the uncertainties of equality, restoring humanity to mathematics. Let's see the first presentation.
So, hello guys, and first of all, sorry because I couldn't be
Myself.
here to you guys in person. I really wanted to, but I can leave my students right now. I'm super excited to share a bit about me and tell you guys what brings me here today. My name is Felipe, I'm a math teacher, and I've been doing that for 15 years right now, and I work with teenagers in middle school here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And the question that moves me as a research is, what have I done as a math teacher in these 50 years? And the answer is that I was kind of relying on this technical side of mathematics.
Can you not hear it?
So my class
I'm sorry,
was filled with numbers, roots, equations, theorems, of solving problems.
Struggle for a social representation.
So turn the mics off. Because it's
Beginning.
not very clear, but you can see them.
Beginning again. Okay?
Just let me turn the light on, because it's so bright.
Configuration.
Yeah, but
Okay.
yeah.
Felipe's teacher in basic school in Rio de Janeiro. Professor, teacher, mathematics discipline. Okay?
Can you still see? Is that better? Or not?
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I can still see them.
Try.
So, hello guys, and first of all, sorry because I couldn't be here with you guys in person. I really wanted to, but I can't leave my students right now. I'm super excited to share a bit about me and tell you guys what brings me here today. My name is Felipe, I'm a math teacher, and I've been doing that for 15 years right now. And I work with teenagers in middle school here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And the question that moves me as a research is, what have I done as a math teacher in these 50 years? And the answer is that I was kind of relying in this technical side of mathematics. So my classes was fulfilled with numbers, rules, equation, theorems, a bit of solving problems, applying mathematics, right and wrong and done. That's it. But after a while, I started to thinking that something is missing in my classroom. And I started to think in mathematics as a human invention. So this kind of way to thinking in mathematics allows me to make two questions that helps me a lot. The first one is, why don't we ever talk about people who is behind the numbers? And the second one is, what are the humanities in how we teach mathematics? It can just be about getting the right answer, you know? It has to connect people. Our class has to connect people with real lives, with real meanings. That's what I understand now for me. That's when I turned myself in a research. I started looking for new ways to teach, new paths that could actually speak to my students in my classroom, and also helps me to grow as a human being, as a good teacher. I want to understand how math classes can contribute to our construct meanings about some concepts like equality, for example. How maths can contribute to our understanding about equality. And on the other hand, I would like to understand how the knowledge about equality that comes from other places can emerge in my classroom. This kind of need brings me to Moscovici's social representation. And today we're gonna show you equality as a social representation object in our math classes. I hope you enjoy.
So, the basic premise of his project is equality is not a universal or fixed concept. Although often treated as neutral in mathematics, equality carries multiple meanings: numerical, formal, symbolic, political, ethnical, and relationship. These meanings vary depending on context, experience, and culture. Therefore, dialogue Moscovici definition of the social representation considering form of socially shared knowledge that guides perception and action. Then, dialogue with Jovetovic, considering social representation, life in the intermediate space between the private and the public, the lived and the institutional. So, equality, when touched in mass classes in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, becomes a boundary object pride, technical definition, and life experience of justice, fairness, and identity. We chose mathematical teachers who are engaged in gender and sexuality studies for this research. It's a group of participation, the research in project by Felipe. This makes the investigation of socially constructed meanings even more interesting. Teachers are mediators between abstract mathematical knowledge and real-life interpretation. They translate formal ideas into classroom language and example, citing how students come to understand concepts like equality. Equality is object investigation, object of social representation. They are already in tension with normative discourse. Teachers who study gender and sexuality tend to question binary thinking, neutrality, and power structures, which are also present in traditional mathematics education in Brazil, particular city, Rio de Janeiro. This makes them more likely to notice reinterpretation and challenge how equality is framing in their practice. Now, we created video as a way to introduce our research project, using it to highlight how the concept of equality in mathematics can be questioned in classroom, reimagination, and reconnecting with human and social dimensions.
What does it really mean to say that two things are equal? Is the symbol equals as neutral as it seems? In this reflection, we explore how mathematics has taken hold of the concept of equality and what may have been left behind in the process. Can math be more than formulas and answers? Can it listen, adapt, and respond to real human differences? Join us as we rethink the meaning of equality, the role of equity, and how we might restore a sense of humanity to the way we teach and understand mathematics. Doing mathematics is a human act. Before any formula, equation, or algorithm, there were hands, voices, bodies, and restlessness. There was a need to compare, to share, to establish relationships. The concept of equality was born this way, before mathematics, in social practices that sought some measure between the self and the other. Long before it was given a symbol, equality was a promise of balance among unequals. Over time, mathematics appropriated this concept. It refined it, gave it precision, formalized its use. But in that process, something was lost. The symbol, equals, came to mean exactness, absolute correspondence, pure identity. What was forgotten is that between the realm of precision and the realm of life, there lies an abyss, and it is there that confusion and silence take hold. In classrooms, this symbol is presented as final. Equal means equal. Period. But what does that equal really mean? For some, it's equivalence. For others, it's the result of a comparison. For some, it's mathematical identity. For many students and teachers, equal is confusing, multifaceted, ambiguous. One word, many meanings. We lost the humanity of mathematics when we began treating students like robots executing steps with no time to think, feel, or question. When doing mathematics became the reproduction of a perfect, sterile model. And in doing so, we forgot that there is much more hovering over the idea of equality than the answer to a problem. Equality, in mathematics, holds meanings such as comparison, proportion, symmetry, identity. But it can also conceal inequalities. How often do we declare equality where there is difference? How often do we apply the same procedure to everyone, ignoring distance, history, and context? This is where equity enters. In the humanities, it rises as a counterpoint, a critique, an alternative. Equity is equality that bends to reality. That distributes with justice, not with exactness. That recognizes difference without turning it into hierarchy. One could say that equity is a refined form of equality, where proportion, context, and listening take center stage. Equity, after all, is contextual equality. We don't look only at what is being compared, but at what surrounds it. Who is comparing, from where, and for what purpose? Context matters, deeply. It shapes the criteria, the weights, and the meanings we assign to equality. Curiously, even in the most technical realms of mathematics, equality is contextual. The equality in an algebraic equation, the equality in geometric congruence, or the equality of a limit in calculus, all follow specific, situated rules. These are distinct contexts with their own logics and demands. Yet in the classroom, this contextual nature is often silenced. The teaching of equality tends to ignore that this concept, like any other, is shaped by time, by the classroom space, by lived experiences, and by the affections that circulate between teachers and students. Equality is taught as if it were neutral, but it is full of choices. What we choose to equate, how we do it, and why. At this point, we might ask, what can mathematics learn from the concept of equity? Perhaps it can learn that precision need not exclude sensitivity. That logic does not have to suppress listening. That measurement can also be an act of care. By approaching equity, mathematics gains the chance to revisit its silences, to reconstruct its ways of teaching and learning, to become a language that is more alive, more just, more open to difference. Maybe the real challenge is this, to restore context in our practices, to bring humanity back into mathematics, and to remember that equality and equity are not just concepts, they are also invitations. Invitations to listen before applying, to recognize before measuring, to teach mathematics not as an end in itself, but as a means to understand the world, a means to transform it, a means to make space, with justice, for more lives in our equations. If mathematics is language, then it is also choice. If it is choice, it is political. And if it is political, it cannot be absent from life. Because every equation has a subject, and every subject has a story.
This is principal main references. The project is developed around these years and the next years, and our perspective is making a difference in basic school about this subject so hard for children and adolescents like mathematics. Thank you very much.
That was a very interesting perspective that we weren't expecting. It was rather a nice surprise, so thank you. Is there anything anyone would like to add to that or to ask a question? No?
I felt very, very inspired. Thank you so much. And I'm trying to find it. If you have a link that we can find this video, it's.
Of course.
I mean, I'll check it again. Have you tried it in practice? Have you tried kind of teaching equality in that kind of humanities.
Yes.
How did it go?
It's very difficult in schools, in Brazilian schools, change the practice because the gestão. La administration. Administration. Face innovations, pedagogical innovations. It's difficult, but teachers inside in research groups in universities get some change, some change with pedagogical materials and operative groups, dynamic groups in classroom for work subjects about mathematics, like division, multiply, operators, division, multiply, sum, and subtraction is principal possibilities of change, because the dynamic groups each other help. The proposal based on Vygotsky and Piaget, but interaction, Vygotsky, conflict, cognitive conflict, Piaget, our frameworks, and in practices, in research, Moscovici e Jo Vitolovici, our framework to understand the dynamic in classroom. I hope it.
Thank you. That was
something Moscovici talked about.
I hope we answer.
I understood. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your generosity.
No, well, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, can I please have Figgou from the London School of Economics? So, welcome. We'd like to get set up. Thank you.
Hi.
Is Alcina here? Alcina? Oh, you are Alcina. Oh, I was taking.
Sou Jo.
I just thought I had an extra person, so that's fine. It's all going to work out beautifully. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Zhang Yi. I come from the Department of Psychology and Behavioral Sciences at LSE, and I'm a PhD student. I'm a third year PhD student. This is my PhD project, so it's still work in progress. My inspiration comes from Moscovici's book, Psychoanalysis, Its Image and Its Public. So my research is basically psychotherapy, its image and its public in China, 2020s. Obviously, we have different procedures and different questions and so on, but that's where the inspiration and theories come from. And my motivation is, my motivation of doing this research comes from mental health conditions in China. So there is an increasing prevalence of mental disorders and a low help-seeking rate. There are a few reasons for it, such as the lack of resource, the stigmatization, and the Western bias in treatment, etc. And there are personality factors as well. One of the personality factors is perfectionism. Existing research mainly shows negative implications of perfectionism on psychotherapy. I will explain more on it later in the slides. So my research project consists of 4 studies. In today's presentation, I will mainly focus on the second and the third study, which are an interview and a survey. Some more on perfectionism. The definition of perfectionism is a personality trait characterized by an unrealistic high standard of performance or achievement and a preoccupation with overly critical self-evaluation. There are various ways of categorizing it, and to explain wholly about the typology of perfectionism would take me another half an hour, so I wouldn't read everything to you. In this particular study, I am just using the Frost multidimensional perfectionism scale, which is kind of a combination of multiple ways of categorizing. It's categorizing perfectionism into concern over mistakes and doubts about actions, personal standards, that's basically a striving for perfection, a striving for higher standards. Parental criticism and expectation, and organization. By organization, I mean I'm an organized person, I'm a neat person, that kind of organization. And as I said before, existing research mainly shows the negative implication of perfectionism on psychotherapy. And that's mainly because if a person is perfectionistic, then they probably don't want to admit their distresses because that would interfere with their ideal self-image. But in this study, I'm also bringing the Chinese expressions of perfectionism into the story, and specifically the moralistic perfectionism of self-cultivation. It is a constant reflection of and rectification on the internal and external aspects of the self in order to facilitate the growth of the good nature. I will explain more on that. So the basic assumption of self-cultivation is that human nature is inherently good. I have the images of Confucius, Mencius, and the Great Learnings, which is also a Confucian classic from ancient China. And from Mencius, we know that human nature contains the 4 sprouts. Everyone's nature contains the 4 sprouts. By sprouts, I mean the beginning, the roots of the 4 capital virtues, which are humaneness, that is a concern for other people's welfare, righteousness, a disdain for immoral conducts, propriety, that's to know rituals, to know what to do at what time, and wisdom, that is the way of distinguishing between moral and immoral conducts. But the sprouts are like roots, they are only beginnings, they must be cultivated to grow. And by cultivation, I mean a constant evaluation and rectification of one's internal state. Therefore, we can interpret self-cultivation as a moralistic perfectionism, the subject of which expands from the self to the family and then the wider society. So it's basically an endless process. Where it ends depends on the capacity of the person. And I have attached a quote from the Great Learning here. I'm not sure whether everyone could read it clearly, but basically it's to do with 2 things. First, the self-cultivation is a basically endless process, and second, it has a lot to do with the internal processing of a person. So I'm bringing this self-cultivation into the story because psychotherapy has also to do with self-reflection and internal processing, and I wonder if this Chinese idea of self-cultivation would actually have positive implications on their motivation to do psychotherapy. Given all that in the background, what are my research questions? I have 3 research questions so far. The first one is, what are the themes of talking about psychotherapy in China? And the second one, what images of psychotherapy are consistent with this talking about psychotherapy? And third, how do people associate their representation of psychotherapy with any expression of perfectionism? That includes the Western and the Chinese. I will explain a bit more about my qualitative inquiry on psychotherapy and perfectionism. So the study employs a 2x2 design. I compared among age groups, that's pre and versus post 1978 perspectives. So I am drawing the line in 1978 because that is the year when the Chinese economic reform happened. And the second pair of social groups is overseas experience group, homecomers versus stay-homers. So I am trying here to explore the psychological impact of exposure to Western discourse. My data collection follows the following procedure. The first task I give them is a free association, which is supposed to make participants think more about psychotherapy. And then I ask them a series of source of information questions. These are questions like, have you ever seen anything on psychotherapy in TV and what was it like? Or in books, in films, in internet, whatsoever. That is followed by some personal history questions. That is, have you ever been to psychotherapy? What was it like? Or do you know anyone who has been to psychotherapy? What was it like? And finally, we had small talk. My data analysis was thematic analysis and abductive analysis conducted in environment. So I had 35 participants. By the thematic analysis, I identified 7 themes, 6 of which were inductive. As you can see, the most prevalent theme is distress. That's basically happening in every interview. It's the distress that brings someone to psychotherapy. And then we had concerns that stops one from going to psychotherapy, the mechanisms through which psychotherapy works, media from which people learn about psychotherapy, and goals that people try to attain through psychotherapy, the qualities that a person expects an ideal therapist to have, and finally perfectionism that's present in 40% of the interviews. Considering we have no explicit question on perfectionism, it is a considerable amount. And by the abductive analysis, I developed 5 theories of psychotherapy from the data. The first one is the aspirin theory, which means that the participants think that by going to psychotherapy, the client is buying a cure to their disease. And by the developmental hierarchy of needs, I mean something very similar to the Maslowian theory of the hierarchy of needs. One must fulfill their physiological needs before they move on to psychological needs. And my Chinese participants actually brought this to a social level as well. So psychotherapy must flourish in a society that's materially rich. Otherwise, the society can only focus on the physiological needs only. And the third theory is the product of science. Psychotherapy is a science that is straightforward. And the fourth theory is psychotherapy as self-cultivation. It's a process of cultivating virtues and improving the self. And the fourth theory, foreign import, again, that's quite straightforward. I will not read everything from this slide. It's just the implication of every theory on psychotherapy in terms of the therapist, the process, and the client. So I apologize if not everyone could see it clearly, but we can discuss a bit more about this after I finish my presentation. So I developed a pretty long survey following the interviews. The survey consists of a bunch of 5-point Likert scale questions. The first ones are the perfectionism scales, and followed by a attitudes towards psychotherapy scale, and then some cultural anchoring and cultural orientation skills, which I developed myself, and then the 5 theories scale, which I also developed myself. And then I had knowledge quiz and other questions like the demographic questions, the experience of psychotherapy, the likelihood of recommending psychotherapy to others, and whether people know about the relationship between chatbot and psychotherapy. And I had 124 questions / items in total. Just to show you a few examples of my questions. So for example, the self-cultivation theory scale contained questions like these. So something to do with making yourself better and rectifying your internal states. And for the knowledge quiz, there are true-false questions, but some of the true-false questions don't really have a correct answer, such as the psychotherapists utilize AI to make judgments of the client's mental state, the last item there. So I'm adding this item there because I want to know what people think about the relationship between psychotherapy and AI. For the survey, I used to have a 2x3 design, so I'm adding expatriates, people who have stayed overseas for over 3 years and still live overseas, into the picture. But later I found that there are just too few Chinese people older than 35 years old and who have overseas experience at all. So I reduced it to 4 groups: the younger stay-homers, the older stay-homers, the homecomers, and the expatriates. I used snowball sampling, so I generated a link and QR code from Qualtrics, and I basically posted them on my WeChat and RedNote, which are Chinese social media platforms. And I also asked my family and friends to repost them. Later on in the process of data collection, I also emailed some LSE alumni to recruit more homecomers and expatriates. I ran quite a few validation tests for all of the skills that I developed, but I wouldn't show you all of them, just to let you know that to maximize my internal reliability, to maximize the Chromebox alpha, I have reduced items from a few scales, such as this aspirin scale and this developmental hierarchy of needs scale. Another change that I made according to the validation tests is the results of factor analysis, which revealed that the cultural orientation scale should be divided into 2 dimensions instead of 3 dimensions. So I used to have 3 dimensions: socialism, modernism, and traditionalism. But later I found out that 3 items from socialism and modernism come nicely together, and all of the other items come nicely together, so I just grouped them. So now I have the 1 socialism, modernism dimension and 1 traditionalism dimension. Some descriptive results. So most of my participants have not been to psychotherapy, and for those who have been to psychotherapy, most of them have been there within 3 years. And within those who have been to psychotherapy, most of them would like to recommend psychotherapy to other people who are either in psychological distress or want to improve themselves. Some general trends on the theories. For example, in the aspirin theory, we can see that most participants are in the disagree side. And for the self-cultivation theory, most participants are on the agree side. And for the other 3 theories, most participants are on the neutral or don't know. Some results from the factor analysis of all of my skills. So I'm circling out all of the theories so that you can see how the other skills which they are closely associated with. For example, the self-cultivation theory is very closely located with the cultural orientation and help-seeking propensity. Help-seeking propensity is the ability of someone to seek help, to find help in psychological distress. For time's sake, I wouldn't go into every single thing in this picture. It's basically a factor analysis of all of the skills that I have for the 4 groups: younger stay-homers, older stay-homers, homecomers, and expatriates. As you can see, the theories are located differently in the 4 groups, and they are located closely with different variables. I also conducted a ANOVA on my results and on my data, and these are the significant ones. For the aspirin theory, the older stay-homers are the most likely to agree with the aspirin theory. And for the self-cultivation theory, the homecomers are the most likely to agree with it. Maybe that's because the homecomers have gone through this homecoming process, so they are more identifying with the Chinese cultural anchoring of psychotherapy, or they are more aware of the Chinese cultural elements that exists in Chinese psychotherapy. I'm also attaching the pictures of the non-significant results of the MANOVA. Obviously, because they are not significant, I wouldn't interpret them very seriously. But if you have any ideas around this, like why is there no significant difference in the science theory, on the developmental hierarchy of need theory, or the foreign import theory, I'm happy to discuss with you. Okay, so some summary. The qualitative part of the project, the semantic interviews generated 5 theories of psychotherapy: the aspirin theory, the developmental hierarchy of needs theory, the product of science theory, the self-cultivation theory, and the foreign import theory. I operationalized these theories into the questionnaire, and the 4 groups of concern: the younger stay-homers, the older stay-homers, the homecomers, and the expatriates, had different profiles in regards to these 5 theories. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, especially for getting through that so quickly. It's certainly a very, very interesting project. Who is your supervisor at LSE?
Sorry, can you speak up?
Oh, sorry, I'm saying thank you for speeding up and going through so much data so quickly. And I was asking Zani, who is your supervisor at LSE?
Martin.
Oh, Martin. Oh. It puts it all in context.
It's irrelevant.
Martin, would you like to comment, Martin? No. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question on this very intense but very interesting and needy study? Yes, Eleni?
That's very interesting, thank you. And sorry for taking up all that time in the beginning, you had less time. So yeah, those 5 things are quite interesting. It reminds me of other kind of studies. I think it's like cross-cultural psychology or however it's called. And I wonder if you find your results to be in alignment with this kind of past research, or whether you have any new, because I'm not familiar myself, I just, some things ring the bell. So, or is it so that something has changed in kind of Chinese society, culture, the way that people move, or that you find kind of discrepancies between previous research findings and what you're now finding?
There is quite limited research on this topic per se. Social representation isn't really a big thing in China, in Chinese academia, and yes, there are psychotherapy studies in China, and but most of them would focus on, for example, the cultural incompatibility of psychotherapy and Chinese culture. But mine is actually finding some Chinese, some cultural compatibility between psychotherapy and Chinese culture, like this one, like the relationship between self-cultivation and psychotherapy. As you can see here, like most people actually believed that psychotherapy is a kind of self-cultivation, or at least these 2 things are related in that they both make a person better. Yeah, so I think this is quite interesting finding, and this is something that's more or less neglected in current Chinese research on psychotherapy, which also focused a lot on Buddhism and Taoism for some reason, but not so much on Confucianism.
And can you tell us a little about what you're talking about when you're talking about psychotherapy? Are you talking about Freudian psychotherapy, or are you talking about Jungian psychotherapy? Is there a whole range?
I'm actually talking about the whole range of psychotherapy. Like I had, so when I designed this, I didn't expect my participants to have any knowledge about psychotherapy, so they might not be able to distinguish between Carl Rogers and Freud and Jung and all these people. And actually my results show that they really didn't have the knowledge, because I had this knowledge quiz, a name identification question with Jung and Adler and Freud, Rogers and some names of scientists, movie directors, etc. And most people really just recognize Freud. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't really make it so complicated that my participant wouldn't understand.
Absolutely. Yes, Gordon?
Thank you, Jean-Guy, for that presentation and the topic, which you know I find rather fascinating. The bit that really intrigues me is this notion of self-cultivation, right? And how people who are exposed to the Chinese way of thinking and who are reared in that kind of life philosophy, as it were, would then take an outlook on something like this. So to go back to your first slide, right? You don't need to go back, just making a reference here, right? So there's two ways of looking at it. The idea is that, okay, there's sprouts and you need to cultivate the sprouts, and then you said also that this is a bit of a never-ending process. And within Chinese culture, there are resources for individuals to be able to do this. So Kung Fu, for instance, is one such practice. And you never reach a state where you're so good and apt at the martial art that then you don't need to practice it any further, because now you're done. Now you're a master of Kung Fu, that's it. Now you don't need to do it anymore. Tai Chi, same kind of thing. You see 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds still practicing their Tai Chi. It's not a state that you ever give up. It's something that you're always having to cultivate, always having to nourish. The great thinking, though, that you cited, right? The great learning, that's right, that's right. That points to a dimension that is reached at the end of a process where you can then sit back, relax, and kind of enjoy the serenity that comes from having cultivated yourself to the point where you now command the four virtues, right? So it's a little bit like, is there a state to get to, and isn't there a state to get to? And the same thing is found in psychotherapy. So with psychotherapy, what's the idea? Do you go to psychotherapy and then you just keep going to psychotherapy forever? Do you keep doing it because, you know, you always have something to reflect upon? Or, I suspect, as most people do, you go to psychotherapy when you have a particular need in your life, you feel kind of stuck, and then you go to psychotherapy, and then at some point you're meant to have a happy ending, you know? At some point you're meant to say, okay, thank you, this has been wonderful, we've been working together for 2 years, now I'm good, I can take it from here myself. And you say goodbye and you move on. And if you don't say goodbye and move on, well then there might be something wrong with the psychotherapy, because it might be making you feel good, but not helping you get better. So what I'm interested in, I think, you know, the big question that emerges from this kind of consideration is, how would participants who have experienced psychotherapy reconcile it with other nurturing practices available in Chinese culture, like Kung Fu, like Tai Chi, like something else, that helps that kind of cultivation in a kind of independent fashion from the exercise of sitting and talking with someone to achieve a particular state. I wonder if it's a seamless integration between the two of them, or whether perhaps there might be a bit of a transformation of knowledge. As in, I do Kung Fu a little bit like I go to the gym or like I play sports. It makes me feel good about myself, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel bad about the fact that I've been demoted at work, so for that I go to psychotherapy. A little bit like carving out a space for one that also accommodates a space for the other. Something that we find in Moscovici's work when he was discussing psychoanalysis with the Catholics, for instance. They accommodated, the idea, okay, you don't go to the psychoanalyst to get into heaven, it won't forgive your sins, you have to go to the priest for that, but if you're breaking up with your wife, it's fine, come on, we kind of make an allowance for it. Did you find a little bit of that kind of carving of the knowledge space, of the epistemic space that would allow these different practices to coexist and make room for each other, or is there more of a kind of confrontation between the two of them?
I think that really depends on the participant. Some participants might think that psychotherapy is not really culturally compatible with other Chinese cultural practices, but some of them actually would anchor psychotherapy on Chinese cultural practices, like calligraphy and painting and like reading classics and reading other sort of Chinese cultural books, knowledge, etc. And it's very interesting because when I ask them in interviews, have you ever been to psychotherapy? Or have you ever done anything similar that's to psychotherapy? They will say, I'm reading something on Chinese, I'm reading some Chinese classics. And it's all about cultivating yourself, and it's all about like self-reflection and making yourself better. And I think that's similar to psychotherapy. Yeah, and that's actually happening in a lot of my older participants. Maybe that's because they identify more with Chinese culture and they are more sort of they are less familiar with Western cultural discourse. So they are more likely to anchor this foreign idea of psychotherapy onto the Chinese cultural practices. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it answers the question and it leads to new ones, of course, because then you start wondering how is it that some people, sign up to one version and some others sign up to another, It's very interesting work. I mean, it's going to take a very long time to resolve all of these issues, and answering one question always leads to another. Thank you very much for it.
Is there anyone else? Yes?
Hi, thank you. It's a very interesting presentation. I think just based on the previous question, I was wondering if you came across the idea of peer support at all. In certain non-Western cultures, when they tend to not subscribe to the idea of psychotherapy, peer support comes across as quite a common theme. So I was just wondering if you ever came across that in your research, and whether people in the Chinese culture use peer support at all.
By peer support, you mean something like informal, like talking to your friends, something like that, or your family, like that?
Yeah, kind of, especially if this is something that is quite frequent in the culture.
Well, some participants did mention it in the interview. So they are like, I don't go to psychotherapy, but sometimes I offer support to my friends. I offer some therapy service to my friends, or some of my friends do it to me. They do mention it informally, but it's not like a very sophisticated system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to? Yes, that's good.
It was talked about. And I have one question for your qualitative.
Sorry, can you please speak up a bit?
I have a question for your qualitative part of speech. Do you know some interesting metaphor that the participants describe this psychotherapy, like some metaphoric way, another simple way? Do you find?
Metaphors. Some people think about there is objectification going on, definitely, and like white coat, like going to a hospital, and some people mention the lab or the brain scanning just because we have the product of science theory there. So some people mention hypnosis as well, Yeah, and also there is always this image about the Freudian psychoanalysis where one person lies on the couch and the other person sits beside them. There are images and metaphors. So both anchoring and objectification are quite evident in there.
I think probably that's the end of our session this afternoon, so thank you very much, and also thank you to all our speakers today. It's been thoroughly stimulating and enjoying, even though it's been rather warm in here. So thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you.